Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. And tonight, a special Sunday night episode. As you may have noticed, we've been doing 9 p.m. episodes Monday through Saturday, and then the Sunday Dave Kranzler pre-football kickoff interview. I can't wait till September. You can watch Kranzler and then football. Although we have a special episode tonight, I did an interview with Jean-Claude of Beyond Mystic. Really interesting fellow, another big silver bug. And he had me on his show. We were talking about what was going on, some of the dynamics in the markets. He had a lot of really interesting questions that I think you might find helpful. So he's kindly allowed us to rebroadcast this episode. And here you go.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jean-Claude from Beyond Mystic, and today we're having a conversation about one of my favorite precious metals, silver. And who we have here today, please give a warm welcome to Chris Marcus. Chris Marcus can be found at arcadiaeconomics.com, and he's the author of the new book, The Big Silver Short. So welcome, Chris. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Jean-Claude. Thanks so much for having me here. I've really enjoyed watching a bunch of your videos. Especially, I saw the Cliff High one, and then you had my friend Bix Veer on, and I heard you love silver. And I think there's a lot of people that are finding themselves, we get attracted to it in our own way. But I mean, there's a lot building beneath it that I think is drawing people in, and certainly an exciting time. So glad to be here today.
Absolutely, and we'll get into that in the show, folks. And at the end too, if we want to take viewer questions, please feel free to type those into the comment box, and we'll get to that probably towards the half end of the show. To begin with, Chris, do we want to talk about a little bit how Universe? I asked this to all my new guests. So how Universe conspired to bring you here today into this particular field, but also as a leading voice into making people understand what the real financial market really looked like. So how did Universe conspire for you to be here today?
Sure, in some very unexpected ways. And perhaps if there's anyone out there that's confused with things that are going on, and I know a lot of people are struggling financially or finding a new job, hopefully I can serve as some firsthand testimonial that these things do come together. In fact, the way I ended up in this after college, I grew up in New Jersey, was just told good grades, go to college, you get a job, and, I was good with math. By the time I hit college, I'm like, all right, well, going to finance seemed, at least if you're going to work, you may as well. These guys seem to get paid well. So kind of just wandered into it. My first job was Moody's, the bond rating agency that still tells you that U.S. corporate debt, it's just not possible. They have the highest possible rating there. Nothing is better quality than that. Went to Gordon for an MBA where I learned Keynesian money printing economics, which fortunately I started to unlearn by the time I was working on a trading floor. The housing bubble crashes. I'm sitting there thinking, gee, wasn't I the guy who was trained to spot this type of thing? That's when I started reading some of what is referred to as Austrian economics, which is really just a free market economic that let people decide what they want to buy, what they want to do with their money, and good things happen. It's like nature. Good things happen, but when you have Federal Reserve or banks distorting markets, so that was really a big turning point, seeing that everyone who had talked about the housing bubble in advance was the people who had written books detailing to the letter, and they were all talking about gold and silver, and it was quite instant for me. It was the first time everything clicked and finally made sense, because yes, the U.S. is running a Ponzi scheme financial system. The Federal Reserve, I think the reason there's so much attention on gold and silver right now is that it's like a cartoon at this point where you say you're going to print unlimited money. We're sending out trillions of dollars of stimulus. The government's bankrupt, so the Fed's just printing it. Now they're going to do round two, which I think it's becoming so obvious that people are really, they're like, yeah, 2 + 2 does equal 4, not 5. This does make a little more sense than
Right.
what we're told, and people are seeing it all in their own areas of life, and certainly it's happening with the finances right now.
So for you, that aha moment, you were on the trading floor, assume 2008, 2009, and you're like, what the hell just happened? How does this work? And you mentioned in the pre-interview that you had, I think it was Peter Schiff that you had listened to, and you realized, oh my gosh, these guys saw this coming, they knew it was coming, and why? And you started to do that research, and I'll get to the specific question on that. But for me, I was in university in the 90s, and I had studied economics, politics, and law. And I thought I understood how the planet was working. Like I knew, I knew what I knew, and everything made sense. But like you in 2008, suddenly I'm like, what the fuck? Nothing made sense. So it was a real rude awakening of sorts. So tell us a little bit about that. How you woke up there in 2008 to this Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, I can remember it like it was yesterday. Because in fact, if you go to March of 2009. When the Fed launches QE1, which basically they melt down the economy, they're going to print money. Somehow that's going to fix it, despite the problem was caused by melting down the economy and printing money, which will continue to lead to that same outcome every time it's tried. So I remember that day I was still drinking my Keynesian Morton Kool-Aid where, it just comes here and all kumbaya. But the guy that I had clerked for, he had trained me as a trader, him and another guy, when Bernanke launched this quantitative easing bomb, I overheard him saying, uh-oh, here we go, we're going to be paying $11 for a loaf of bread soon. And that was really the turning point. I still remember thinking, it's like that, all right, this is something different than I've heard. And, we're trained to mock anything that's different from the script.
Right.
Then there's this other part of me saying, well, this guy's a smart guy I've known. Why don't I just ask why he's saying that? And so he sent me a Peter Schiff video. And actually, I'd taken a vacation out to San Diego, and it was April 1st. I watch Peter Schiff on vacations, apparently. I have weird hobbies, but I remember it was as soon as I heard it, it was just explaining all the things that didn't make sense. And I was just fixated ever since then, especially in 2011 when both gold and silver went up quite a bit. I was also trading equity options at the time. So by then I'd been studying gold and silver for a couple of years, had a big bet on. I actually thought I was home free back then. And what happened, which I know you talked with Bix about and what the book digs into, is that U.S. got downgraded. There was the debt ceiling debate, the Tea Party. I still believe now, even after doing the book, that the system was close to coming off the tracks then. But if you look historically, in fact, I have a question for you, if anyone in the audience wants to take a guess at this. Do you know how many of the paper currencies throughout history have survived? And the dollar is not going to be any different.
Right.
Maybe I was a little naive, and certainly people who get into gold and silver and learn that the banks do things that now the Department of Justice has labeled as charged with the RICO statute, and not just market manipulation.
Yeah, that's a whole new narrative for sure. Yeah.
And I think it's actually fitting because to me, I find it easier to think when I try and conceptualize banks or government, I just think of Goodfellas or the Godfather. I think it's actually a lot closer to that than I ever realized, which, I think the positive is that, without the dollar, this idea that we're all, just helpless and it's the dollar. It's not the dollar. The dollar is inflated to 99% of it since the Fed came along. So when people are battling on Facebook over healthcare and one guy's a Democrat, the other's a Republican, and they're trying, the Fed's eating 99% of the pie and then taxing another half. So we're getting, maybe a fraction of a percent of what you're actually contributing. But and I don't think people get the extent. I don't think life is supposed to be this hard as it's made to seem. And I think that was close to an end in 2011 because typically what happens, people see gold and silver prices rising because they don't want the currency. They see that it's being printed, or back in the Roman days, they're putting other metals in the coin. And so they flock to gold and silver. And what was interesting is that it's traded in paper. So what happened in 2011 when the metals were at their highs, the price was hammered because you can write unlimited paper. But it's left a situation now where it was interesting in the book. I asked 15 different silver experts how many claims per each ounce of silver. So for each piece of metal, how many people think they own it? I haven't found an answer of less than 500 to 1.
There was a Republican in one of the testimonies a couple of years back that had said exactly that. And as it was the first time somebody actually admitted it, that there was like 500 to 1 trading in these naked shorts. And I was like, wow, that's what they're admitting to. Imagine all the over-the-counter derivatives that we don't know about. So that's pretty fascinating. Let's get into that, the manipulation and how the tools that they use to manipulate the price here. But before that, I was thinking what you were saying. And in 2008, for me, like one of the big, Peter Schiff was on my radar also, and he was making a lot of sense. I was listening to Jim Holter, Bill Sinclair, those guys who were reading their articles. And what clicked it for me, though, because for a while I was trying to navigate through all that and I wasn't sure really what it meant and what I needed to do to protect myself until I heard it was a series from Mike Maloney, The Hidden Secrets of Money.
Great videos, by the way.
Oh yeah, that really opened it up for me, and now I understood. We talked about the history, like you just said, like all the currencies going to zero, and how government goes into deficit spending, and then they get into devaluating the money. So that's very fascinating. Now let's bring up a slide here for your book, and see if I can share a screen here for people to see that. So what was the trigger for you to write this book? What was that driving force that got you here?
Well, it's interesting because back when I was getting into this, 2009, as soon as I got into it, anytime there was anyone talking about the metals, I couldn't get enough of it. And then especially when I saw the prices get pounded after 2011,
right?
That was when I remember one day there was like, I guess I have heard people have said gold and silver are manipulated. So I started reading, I loved listening to podcasts. And as the years went by, I had this trading background. So as I was listening, I'd be like, I wish you would ask him this, and then finally I started doing that and just kept investigating this situation. And I think certainly for people who have invested in the metals, especially back in 2011, I think a lot of people made a very wise, intelligent financial decision, and they got clobbered. It wasn't because their thinking wasn't right. It was because these banks are committing felonies. Right. And I know some people, like to call that conspiracy theory, but I would suggest to folks you can look at the Deutsche Bank trader transcripts that were.
Okay, just to back you up here, these traders are actually admitting it now, and they've turned state evidence. So this is no longer a conspiracy theory. These are facts, and we're going to get to there as long as we have rule of law and there's somebody higher up that wants to follow down this rabbit hole. And I think that's going to happen when they decide, or whenever the controllers decide that the US dollar is done and then we're moving into the new financial system. And I think that's what we're seeing now. And that's why finally there's this narrative change now where, hey, they're talking about RICO charges now. So I agree with you. It's no longer a theory or conspiracy. These are hard facts, and there's more than enough evidence to show it. So please go on. I just wanted to back you up on this for people who were listening.
Yeah, well, it's interesting what you mentioned there. I'm guessing you may have seen, but for anyone in the audience who didn't hear, interestingly, in each one of those guilty confessions, every single one of those guys said it was done with knowledge of their supervisors, and it was widespread practice at the firm.
Exactly.
So, and if you go back, there's several banks have been fined. Deutsche Bank, they made them release their trader transcripts, and these were some real whoppers, especially to me, because when I was back on the trading floor, we had our compliance guy, nice guy, and he'd often tell me 2 out of every 3 things I type on our chat or email are read by internal or some form of compliance. Apparently, the douchebag guys didn't get that message. I mean, it's like that scene in The Big Short. Remember when you've seen that? And they go to Miami to meet the real estate brokers or like the frat boy guys, you know, going, why are they confessing? And the other's like, I don't think they're confessing. They're bragging. And certainly it's taken longer than I or anyone that I found in silver. And again, you talk with Bix, say the same thing. None of us imagined it would go on this long. But that was really where the whole thing with the book came from, because as the years went by, I understand there's a lot of people frustrated with the weight. I've eaten that pain myself, but I wanted to put, at least as best as I could see it, in context for anyone who wants to know all the money printing, the metals, is it manipulated? I wanted to create something. The information's out there, but what I did was use an interview-style format. So Bix was one chapter. Bart Chilton, former regulator from the CFTC, who put me on the map a little bit because he was part of the CFTC's investigation into silver manipulation. And he revealed, we were all stunned we didn't know if he would talk but he confirmed JP Morgan took over the big position from Bear Stearns.
Yeah.
He confirmed it was over the position limits. They were given a waiver to make it smaller. They made it bigger. And this is the exact time in 2008 when silver falls from $21 to $9. Gold goes from 1,000 to 700, which most people say was panic selling. But Bart Chilton confirms otherwise because he tells you don't have to take my word for it. He sat there and said it. And this was when you had a physical silver shortage. So when you kind of combine a lot of these different things that have happened and put it in context, I think it's unfortunate. If I were the president or running the Fed or one of these agencies, it's not what I would do. At the same time, it's beyond the most fascinating thing I ever could have imagined, and watching it unfolding as we speak, where now, we're getting announcements, almost by the week from liquidity warnings from the COMEX, or you saw HSBC lost $200 million on a single day in March. CIBC just announced they lost $60 million. Anyone, if you want to pull up a chart of gold from March 23rd to 24th, you can see what happened. And, I guess we've learned, all of us, to be careful on the timing, but it sure seems like what I imagine Enron was like the week or the month before. And again, I know it's because it's anything that takes a while. It's the same thing, if you told people the mortgages were a bubble in 2005.
Right.
Go ahead.
Okay, so a couple of things here for people just joining the chat. Welcome to the show. We have Chris Marcus on from Arcadia Economics. He's the author of The Big Silver Short. We're talking about the book now, and we'll also be taking questions from the viewers. So please start picking up your questions into the chat box, and we'll get to those in a second. In the meantime, I wanted to just give a hat tip to Tom here, who put out a comment, "Pay me my silver now." And of course, Tom is probably referring to the song from Big Swear. So thanks, Tom, for that.
I hear it in my head now. Pay me my silver now.
Exactly. So there's a hat tip to Big Swear. Thank you, everyone. And so going back to what you were saying, we've been punished, those who are awake and try to diversify out of the system, when we got kind of the understanding and the understanding that this was a Ponzi scheme, because we tried to get out of the stock market, the bond market, and we tried to look at things like physical gold and silver, of course, not the paper stuff, the derivatives. And we also, some of us got into cryptos, and maybe we can get into that, or this could be another show. But we were relatively punished for it. And I thought we'd get into now what you see in terms of, like, this whole crisis started, I think, in September. It started years ago, but where it started to go in earnest was last September with the repo market. Yeah. And maybe we can get into that now and what you see in terms of the next step. There's, like, now we've accelerated all this money printing. Where does this lead for gold and silver? And what are the outlying forces that are kind of manipulating this whole game right now? What are your thoughts on that, Chris? Well,
yeah, you mentioned what happened last September, which I think was stunning. We all the, I have a show on YouTube where I bring people from around the globe talking about this. Everyone has been stunned, because we saw these repo lines that, like you said, happened last September, which is why when Jerome Powell went on 60 Minutes and said the current economic situation is different than 2008, this was just caused by Corona, he flat out lied there. And I don't think there's any, misspoke, or the guy went out and lied the same way Bernanke and everyone else has lied. And I think that's why it's coming to a head now, because a couple of years ago when Janet Yellen was saying, well, we're going to raise interest rates, we're going to tighten all this easy money. I mean, they talked about it. They never actually did it, but you were at least able to con people into believing they were going to. I think we're coming to a head in the metals now, because it's you already have the Feds doing unlimited quantitative easing. And a couple of weeks ago, Jerome Powell came out and said aggressive action might be needed. And I'm thinking, what's aggressive action when you're already doing unlimited? And right. People aren't idiots.
Yeah,
these guys treat us like we are, but it's interesting. There's a lot of people now. It's not just the gold and silver crowd buying. I have a partnership with a bullion dealer, and we're getting a lot of calls, and people are like, hey, I lost a lot of money. I'm worried about the stock market. Maybe they haven't studied the Fed for the last 10 or 20 years, but they can see guys are printing trillions at a pop with no end in sight. So there's a lot of these things building. And as I know you get into, it's not just finance. We see it building in many areas of life, certainly with the political stuff. And I haven't seen Hillary Clinton's laptop or Wiener's laptop or Clinton's email server, but I get the feeling that the stuff that's on there is beyond imaginable.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of unusual things happening now. I guess the one thing I've learned, always factor in, it's like the devil fighting for its life. And I think all this is based on printed money. So, yeah, it makes sense that these guys would kill people to keep the prices low and rig financial systems. The Rothschilds funding both sides of the war. It's not, in my opinion, healthy, mentally sane people that we're talking about. But I've always wondered, does it unravel on itself at some point? Where it's like you have people that are like the drunken gambler, but not the good gambler.
Right.
Like at some point you self-implode. And I think that's happening now.
Well, at some point the virus kills the host, right? So, or that parasite kills the host. And I think actually we were there in 2008. And since then, the host has been on a ventilator, respirator, like all this other equipment. And we've been pumped in with cocaine, which was this free money and negative interest rates. And, when I was studying economics, they never taught me about negative interest rates. Like that wasn't even on the radar as a possibility. So when that showed up, I was like, what? So yeah, let's get into, you talked about this last couple of months here, the repo market and all these shenanigans, but Scotia Makata just got out of silver. I wanted to get, when you called in and we decided to do this interview, I'm like, I want to ask him what he thinks about Scotia and why they're out of the game and what it means. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's actually a pretty interesting story because they paid $168 million to exit that business. They've been trying to sell it for a couple of years, But here's the thing, that the banks are short metal. So as gold has been rising, we talked about HSBC, CIBC, someone is losing money as these prices are going up.
Yeah.
And what I've always wondered, because again, when you have a big market concentration like that, you do have a prisoner's dilemma type environment where, if one of them heads for the hills, that could potentially be enough to unravel it. And Scotia, that they paid that much to exit, I mean, who knows what the real amount was. And then we saw that other announcement last week that said the bullion banks were going to pull back 50 to 75% of their trading in the precious metals, which, they just toss it out there like it's normal course of business. But Jean-Claude, I know you've studied this stuff, you've been following the markets. Isn't it normally anytime a market gets hot, Wall Street is all over it? They're any way they can be involved. And now here we have gold and silver. They're already rising for obvious reasons. The Fed is already hyperinflating, and they're saying that's not even enough. Now Wall Street's just leaving. That's another one of the big signs that now some of the people that I've spoken with, that especially some of the folks in London who are close to the LBMA, where a lot of the, I don't know if I would call it trading, the paper warrant swapping takes place.
Sure. Right.
We're hearing a lot of things about getting hard to source metal. A fellow named Andrew McGuire that some people might be aware of, he talked with him on the show last week. He mentioned one of the banks, or a banker that he knows, basically the boss was like, you exit this or you're going to be liable. And certainly, you would think this is a dangerous time to be short a lot of metal. It's harder to me to imagine how they didn't want to do that earlier.
Well, unless they have a get out of jail free card. And I think that's, why they've been able to do this for so long. And maybe now, though, that get out of jail free card is no longer valid, or it's about to be expired for some reason. And this is why they're taking or paying big money to get out of the game. In the case of Scotia Makata, and I heard that Scotia also put money aside for court rulings or lawsuits. So that's telling.
They've already been charged years ago. So
yes. Right. So was this like contingent to new lawsuits as well? But it's very telling that there's smoke here, and where there's smoke, there's fire. And again, I've been saying this for 10 years, and I've been the stupid one in my family because it never happens. They always seem to kick the can down the road and everything's fine. And you see, JC, the stock market's, going up again, everything's fine. It looks like it's different this time. And you mentioned something earlier, and I want to touch back to it. It's not just the financial system. We're entering in an age on this planet. Humanity's consciousness is rising. There's also these energies from space that, again, we don't need to get into who, the why, the what in this episode, but it's doing something to our memory, our cellular DNA, and we're waking up. And as we're waking up, we're seeing all these old structures from the old age crumble. So whether that's religion, politics, finance, and all this. So we're in this turmoil now. And a lot of people have been asking for years, when's that reset? When's this thing going to come? We're in it now. There's no question about it now. And so we're in for fascinating times. And I really like people like you, and I recommend to all my viewers to go read the books, to listen to the podcast, to educate themselves, because they're not going to get it from the 6 o'clock news. For the longest time, they've told us that gold was a pet rock and a barbaric relic and all this stuff. And yet 2 years ago, the Bank of International Settlements actually wrote down that gold was now a tier 1 asset. So there you go, folks. It is money. And so there's a reason for all this manipulation. It's because it's in direct opposition or competition with the dollar. And so is crypto. So you've seen these exchanges come up and now all these derivatives in crypto to do the same game, basically, is to manipulate that. And so I think that what, Chris, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think what you're also seeing is that this whole game is about to change. When is it? Next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? And I mean, no, let me rephrase that. It is changing now, but when do you think it's going to be evident to everyone, or to the bulk of the planet who's not paying attention right now, that something big just happened, and these are not the systems of your grandfather or even your father, that somehow something's new? What do you see on the horizon as you're doing all your studies?
I think you nailed it in that some of that has already happened. I find it interesting that a lot of people, more so than ever, are questioning what we're being told about Corona. And certainly, I mean, it's unfortunate to see what's happening with this situation in the past week. I find it interesting that both Trump and the governor of Minnesota made clear comments that they said people are organized groups are coming in from somewhere else and causing trouble. Yeah. I'll leave it at that. I mean, but I think there's a history of these guys going in with these false flags, and I'm not saying it wasn't horrific, what happened by all means, but it seems to me like someone's amping these things up, yet you see people noticing that and really questioning in a way unlike we've seen before. Now, certainly when the financials change, I think that'll be a big one. And you had the first blow these last couple of months.
Yeah.
Obviously, and I'm one of them, you're one of them. There's a lot of us that, like, when are we going to see a big number on silver or a big number on gold? I think there's, especially given what I do, there's some responsibility to be responsible. I haven't seen the smoking gun, okay, this is happening tomorrow, but my background is as an option trader, and certainly in my own internal probabilities, I think we're going to finally see some movement this year, especially because you know how Americans, they have this thing, they trade on momentum. After they buy after it's gone up and sell after it's gone down, which isn't that backwards, but
yeah.
But it's when something starts moving, like no one's cared about silver. In fact, you could probably run a great hedge fund if you just ask 1,000 people, what do they love to buy and what do they love to sell? And you take, what everybody hates, buy that, what everybody loves. I mean, it's just by the energy of a market, there's going to be a natural imbalance there so, I mean, when I wonder what happens when gold starts going through 1,900 or 2,000, and it's all over CNBC, Wall Street Journal. I love picturing, some of these banks or mainstream institutions are like, hey, Bill, what's that? The sliver is up 30%. Oh, silver! Oh, it's up 30% today.
I know, it's ridiculous.
And silver being so small,
yeah,
I don't see as much of the slow move up, because when you put enough leverage on something, when the mortgages collapsed 12 years ago, it had to move big like that, because when you suppress something or prop it up and put a lot of leverage on it, it's like if you swing a sledgehammer at your knee, you kind of know what's going to happen.
Right.
And I think you point out something that is incredibly relevant, where it's a lot of the good people out there who are trying to live life honestly. They made a decision, they got pummeled on it, and it's like, feels like you got punished. Yet I would say to that, remember in the movie, again, The Big Short, which is such a great metaphor for this, those guys, they made a fortune. But you saw, and maybe that's part of life, that to get, a big win like that, life makes you earn it or test your patience. Certainly it's not been the easiest last 8 years, but now it's again, in my own life, I'm seeing it happen in the world. Just, it's nice where all of a sudden things change quickly. Maybe it'll take some more overt financial shocks before it's more widespread. Although I think people are waking up by the day, and unfortunately, people like you that are sharing this. So
yeah, I think too. Like I was listening to, I'm a member of the Jim Sinclair Mindset Gold Premium membership, and on one of the calls, he was saying that just to back you up too, like when gold hits 2000, that's when everybody in the United States at least starts paying attention, and now they're chasing something that's already gone up and on the way up. So that's that mentality that's different from the east to the west. So that was interesting. What Jim Sinclair said too, I think he just reiterated this on Greg Hunter, maybe it was last week, that he saw gold minimum when this is said and done, and we can get into the time frame here, but essentially he said there would be two resets. One, the first one coming up would be an engineered reset from the thinking heads or the politicians, which would bring gold anywhere between $2,500 to maybe $5,000. And then the second reset would happen within the next 5 years, where the market would price gold. And at that point, he's talking about 50,000 an ounce for gold. That was the low end. But he said, if you want the exact number, when you do the math, it was 87,500 something. And so Greg Hunter was like, whoa, that's a big number. And what was funny was Jim was saying, well, it's not rocket science. I've already done 2 of these calls in my career, and I was dead on to almost to the day, to almost to the dollar. And all I'm doing is using the simple math equation of debt versus the gold holdings that we're told we have. And so gold does that accounting. And so maybe we can get into here, because there's a question from the viewers. What happens if gold hits 2,500? Will the COMEX fail? And just to get you started on that question, Chris, I think the COMEX already failed. It failed last year, maybe a year and a half ago, with all these exchange for physicals. But they're hiding the fact that they've defaulted on delivery. So let's get into these questions here and break that down a little bit.
It's a great question, and I would guess that the COMEX would overtly fail before it hits 2,500. I don't. We're already seeing metal shortages now. I know you talked with Bix. A lot of people have heard about the bullion dealers, mints getting shut down. So they heard about the retail level. But what's interesting is now we're hearing the shortages on the wholesale level. I'm guessing you're familiar with Eric Sprott, who has a multi-billion-dollar bet on silver. And it was interesting, about a week and a half ago, he mentioned that one of the largest dealers was calling him, asking if he had any 1,000-ounce bars. And it reminded me of like one of those movies where there's like the guy addicted to crack. He's like, hey, do you have any bars? I need them. And
I need my fix now.
Andrew McGuire, again, I talked with him last week. He talked about the silver shortage, and he even mentioned that now to meet the gold demand, the refineries are switching over to ramp all their production for gold. It's like now they don't even know when the silver is coming. So essentially, this all goes on, at least for the last decade. I've thought, how long does it go on?
Right.
Maybe the regulators do something. They've been doing this investigation for a while. The price, not my words, but Bart Chilton said when I interviewed him, what you see in the price describes his definition of a spoof. So it's like they're arresting these guys and they're telling us about the investigation, although the crime's going on repeatedly. So I don't know, maybe they'll do something or not. My best guess is that the market will ultimately end this when you get to the point where people are showing up and saying, I want delivery of my metal, and it's not there. And that appears to be happening now. So
there's definitely rumblings, and there's a good question here. COMEX failing completely happens when the dark money financing the short position dries up. That's a good point. I mean, we have this unlimited printing press now that's propping up this system. Is it partly that, or is it the confidence breaking that also breaks COMEX? Where does one meet the other in your opinion, Chris?
Well, I mean, they're all connected. It's an interesting question. The dark money, I don't know. Is there a limit to that? There could be. I mean, if you told me that a reset, I mean, in one sense, it's happening, but like if you told me this is what it would look like before they walk out one day and say gold's $10,000 and we have a whole new financial system. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that I do not have specific information that's happening, but we've heard the rumors of that over the years, and certainly you would think if that were happening, this is kind of what it might look like before that happens. It's my guess is that I don't think they'll run out of paper cash because they can always make more of that. But again, when you run out of people to actually deliver metal, and it was interesting. In fact, last week was the beginning of the new delivery cycle for gold. And apparently, I guess 10,000 contracts was the norm. There were 30,000 contracts hit in April, which was stunning. And we're still waiting to see what the final numbers are, but I believe it's already 30,000, might be as high as 50,000. So what day it ends is still unknown, but it seems like a run on the bank is happening now.
I agree with you. And the repos, I think, is a big part of that, the lack of liquidity. We're seeing, and there's something else here, because I think we have to go further to answer the viewer's question. It's not just about the money they're printing to keep up this game. It's also about the agreements with all the different partners worldwide. And I think this is also where it's going to break, because China, Russia, India, Iran, like these guys have been the have-nots in this equation for the last number of years. And I think they're getting their fill with being in that position. So it seems to me, when I study geopolitics, and it seems to me that we're moving into this multipolar world as opposed to the old one where the US dollar was the king and everybody else had to kind of obey by those rules. I think now we're getting into, there's enough military, I don't want to say equivalence. I almost want to say maybe supersedence in a way, because Russia has been showing some technology that has put some Americans to shame there in the Navy. And so I think that maybe with this, with the military on one side, but also on the policy front, if these countries start to either have a gold trade note, I think there's one right now, actually, a kind of de facto, but it's not like really well known and it's not down to the population. But if China, for example, encourages their population to buy gold or to start using gold and silver for transactions as this pandemic is roaring through their economy, I mean, that's going to force the hand of everybody else. And then it's game over, because as soon as you have a bid for gold as money or silver, that changes the game the next day. There's the price mechanism that is the COMEX and the LBMA is a complete facade. They're not actually trading the physical. So once that demand actually becomes real, it's game over. So I hope that kind of answers the viewer's question. It's a little bit of both. Yes, the money printing, but also the geopolitics. And right now we're seeing a lot of fire on the geopolitical front that could impact exactly that. The other question was, what's going to happen to silver? So Ron, let me just put this up here. So we were talking about gold, but in silver, you know, Jim Sinclair always says silver is gold on steroids, right? It's such a small market and it moves a lot more. When you get into the books and the interviews and the fascinating people you've talked to about the book and got that research from, what are they telling you, maybe off the cuff as well as on on the record, about what they think silver is going to do in all of this?
I actually tried to find someone who would give a counter argument in the book. I was not able to do it. I couldn't find one. And if you think gold is going to do well, my expectation, and I would say this is, I don't know if I've ever seen a question in finance where there's so much widespread agreement, unless you're working for one of these bullion banks. I mean, I think everyone is darn excited about silver. The way I look at it is that if my thesis is correct, that the only reason it came down from $49 in 2011 was because it was smashed with paper contracts. I've seen that as a floor. How much higher it goes than that, I'm darn excited to find out. I've had this feeling, and it's one of the reasons nice talking with you. And I know you get these things where, I used to try and analyze the heck out of everything. Now I've learned to meditate and use intuition more. My gut tells me that even as much as I've thought about this or been excited about it, I have a feeling when it finally goes, even me or people like Bix and you will be stunned at how big it goes. I know you had Cliff on, and he's talked about a $600 number. I think we're going to see whether it gets to 600 or not. Now, also, there will be some point in which the price eventually won't matter, because it's not, you could really say it's not the price of silver that's changing. It's the dollar value that's changing. It's, maybe chicken, egg type, which goes first. But that's why I think so many people have stuck in there. And keep in mind, silver is not only a third of its 2011 high, it's a third of its 1980 high.
I know. When you talk about putting that balloon underwater and that pressure building, for silver, it's just off the chart. And maybe actually, I wanted to get you on this. When I thought about the interview last night, I was like, well, what do you think is driving this bigger and bigger divide between the gold to silver ratio? We're at all-time highs now, over 100 to 1. What in the last couple months do you think is driving that all of a sudden? Because we've seen the 70 and the 80s, like we were there for quite some time, but this 100 stuff, like what's really going on in your respect?
Well, that's another paper deal, because actually, if you look at the ratio, if you want to buy physical gold or silver, I haven't done it in the last week or two, but it was in the 70s or 80s. So I'm wondering if the COMEX at some point, becomes like the Chris price or the Mickey Mouse price or the Disneyland price, where they can say whatever it is, but I guess we're going to find out if there is any physical delivery mechanism to the COMEX, because the premiums are still high. There's an ARB on the board. Mm-hmm. You can instantaneously buy and sell it higher. That is the market saying there's something going on. There's some risk premium here. Yeah. So back in March, when silver goes from $19 to below 12 as the Fed, creates the biggest monetary package in history. Again, it's interesting. I don't think that people question all these things you hear, because everyone was saying, well, it's panic selling. Everyone was selling their SLV shares. Well, the only problem is that, at least according to the SLV report, shows that a ton of metal has been going in there. So that doesn't add up to me, similar to how it didn't add up when you had a physical silver shortage and the price dropped in 2008. That is whether some like hearing it, some don't like hearing it. I don't have any interest in telling anybody anything other than what I see. In my best opinion, that's what happens when you trade things in paper. But I'm actually interested to see what happens. If you look at the silver price today, got hammered again, and yesterday.
Cryptos as well.
I'm wondering if we're close to the point. I said this last week, so now we can test. By all means, don't go out. This is not a guarantee, but I wondered last week, I'm like, could we be at that point where the next time they try and smash it is when it really backfires in their face? And it was interesting yesterday, it got hammered 50 cents or so and then went right back up. I haven't looked since we've been on today, but perhaps one last comment on that. Again, I mentioned I bring orders to Miles Franklin, which is a precious metals dealer. So I talk with Andy Scheckman, who quite a bit on these things. Remember back in March, he was telling me that when the price went down, people were buying a lot of metal. And I said, well, what about on the days when the price gets smashed? Because that used to be when people would panic and throw in the towel. And he said they keep buying because they know it's bullshit.
Yeah.
And excuse my language, but that was the exact quote. And I think that's very relevant because, 5 years ago, the price would get smashed. It would stay down for a while. People would get frustrated because you didn't know when it was going to happen.
Yeah.
You didn't know how long you'd have to wait. But I think that's one of the reasons. The more people who find out, this is all based on a secretive crime being kept hidden, which was, certainly one of the things I wanted to get out of the book. Hey, people buy silver, do what's best for you. Don't do anything because of what I say, but at least if you want to know why I think this and why so many others think this and why the things that are happening now, that was the whole point of the book, to lay out. It's going to go, and I know you're French. Maybe they probably didn't teach it. I don't know if you went to a government school there, but this has happened before with the London gold pool.
Yeah.
When France started saying, all right, we'll take the gold. And you can go in Paul Volcker's autobiography he wrote before he passed away. I think it's page 61. He talks about how they were suppressing the gold price. And eventually it blew up. That's what led to Nixon taking us off.
Yep.
I get it. It hasn't gone up the last couple of years, but went from $3,500 to $1,700 now. So, which is wildly outperformed the stock market over that time as well. So absolutely. I get the way. Keep in mind, it is an opportunity to buy an asset cheap. So I think for people who can have patience, it's a good time.
You brought up a good point here. You're talking about your experience, and for the folks on YouTube, of course, we're not giving any financial advice here. We're just sharing our thoughts, our experience, our research with you, but we encourage you to go do that research for yourself and get that knowing and that understanding of what's really happening with the financial system, and then to take the decisions that are appropriate for you and your family. So that waiver having been said, there's a good comment on the screen here, with the pandemics, with everybody losing their jobs right now, with the banks reportedly, raising their ratios to lend to people. Like, how do people get into silver now? And I'll get your thoughts on that in a sec, Chris, because for me, I've been saying to people for a number of years, you don't need a lot of money to buy silver, and there's always ways to find money. And for me, one of the big tricks I would tell people, I'm like, well, just go around your house, take a pen and a pad and write down the things you haven't used for a year. And if you haven't used them for a year, sell them on Craigslist. It's $20 here, $40 there, $100 there. Suddenly you have a few $100 and you could buy your silver. But right now, even that's starting to be a problem because people are selling their stuff on Craigslist just to make ends meet because they've lost their job. So what are your thoughts on that a little bit now, and maybe find a way to encourage people to stay in there to see what the future has entailed for us, and maybe how to get into that game a little bit as best they can. What are your thoughts on that, Chris?
I think it's a great question, and also the comments you made are really helpful too, because there's a lot of people that things aren't so easy right now and maybe don't have a lot of money to invest, and maybe silver isn't the first part to start with. And again, that's why I would say I really appreciate, and I'm hoping whether during our call or later on to hear more about some of the things that you offer with your programs, because I think silver is great. I think gold's great. I think certain cryptos are all going to do well. But with all that said, I can say firsthand, I'll take questions if you want, but the mindset trumps it all. And if we think, and I grew up in New Jersey, learning to worry, expect things to go to heck, and and I've seen, I put a lot of effort into shifting my mindset, and that I believe it all starts because if you have, the wiring isn't right, you can get a good investment, but you'll sell it at the wrong time, or so really just starting, and if you're. What I think is happening here, and I know it's very stressful for a lot of people right now, but this is how nature and economics work, where, yes, a lot of the traditional jobs of, working for the military or all these corporations that do stuff that isn't serving any humanity are going away. And it's forcing us to find different ways to do things and change what we were doing. So, if you're in a position where you don't have a lot of money saved, but just the fact that you're watching a channel like this, you're seeing things that are going on. There's great areas of need in the world. And, for me, I had this financial background. I found the thing with silver completely intriguing. So, all right, I had some skills there. It was also something I was really interested in and passionate about. And there were years where, even up to a couple of months ago, I mean, I could talk about silver, but turning it in, I've spent 8 years trying to figure out how do you turn a good knowledge of the U.S. financial system being a Ponzi scheme into a business.
Right.
But fortunately, through that time, I kept doing a lot of the things that you tell your listeners about in meditation and just different ways of channeling the energy. And I think that's what we're all being forced to do in our own ways. I know, and I've been there certainly at times that can be overwhelming or frightening, yet this one trick I have is that, if you're watching this thing right now and you're not in any agonizing pain, maybe you have $10 in your bank, -40 or 2 million, but if you're in one piece right now, that means everything you've ever been worried, scared, cried, or fearful about, by the fact that we're here, we've overcome it, or we're in the process of overcoming it. And I say follow that, and if it's, maybe you'll end up with a lot of silver. It's been interesting in my case now. I had a talk with a lot of executives from the mining companies, and because I have an audience that's into silver now, I've been thinking, all right, how can I take my audience? Here are companies that are trying to reach investors. I didn't know how that was going to play out, but it was one of those things where it kept going and just seeing, all right, I don't know what tomorrow's going to be, but I have seen firsthand that when you're following what you're meant to be doing and you keep going and are able to relax the need to know how it works out ultimately right now, so some people buying silver today is right for them. Some people, if somebody needs their rent money next month or to make a profit over the next quarter, I wouldn't recommend to buy silver or gold. I mean, he's talked for the last hour almost about how they're manipulated. So, every tool has a purpose. But, again, even more important than money, I think just now, we're seeing this shift. We're seeing this stuff come down, and there's greater need than ever. So I would say just start with thinking about what you really love to do, what skills you have, and then say, all right, let's see what's going on in the world. It's going to be different for everyone, but also I think you keep watching Jean-Claude's show. I think that there are people out there like you that, I mean, I knew my analysis of this hasn't changed since I left in 2012, but what's changed a lot is me, how I interact with people, right, how I go about doing things. And I want to keep living in a Wall Street way. And unfortunately, I'd like to think I was never involved in some of the stuff that I found out about now. But, it's us as people that change. And keep in mind, even during the Great Depression, when you know what's coming, there are people then who made a fortune. And there's great need now. And I think that's a good starting point even before any investment, whether it's silver or gold or cryptos or anything.
Chris, I got to give you a compliment because, in this financial world and in this economy, the way it's been playing out, people tend to speak or to sell their book, the phrase. And I'm not talking about the physical book here, but, sell their subject, that type of thing. And you just told people, maybe silver right now is that best for you. Work on yourself and do the authenticity and the self-empowerment and the knowledge. And I just really love that. And I think the authenticity authenticité in French, with which you're communicating is resonating, and people will hear that and they'll still come back and buy your book and read your book. But it's the fact that you gave them the option to empower themselves. I think if you keep on that track on your channel, and if I keep on that track here too, and other people do that, that's really where things are going to change. Because as you said, it's not necessarily about the silver, the gold, the crypto that you have. It's where you're at. It's what you've done that brought you here, and it's your outlook on life. Because like in anything else, you know, you go on the plane, and if you lose pressure, they say, put your mask on first and then help the other people. Well, in these times of changes right now, it's all about going within and to finding, you know, why you're here, what your soul mission is, and to remember that, and to work through maybe some of that old karma, and to let that go. Because once you're able to let go those rocks in your pack sack, well, you'll have room to put a few more bricks of silver, right? So metaphorically, I think that's what Chris is getting at. And Chris, I really love that message. Folks, so big compliment to you. Like, that, really well said, Chris. I really appreciate that. And thank you so much on YouTube for watching. Guys, I'm sorry I have to cut this short. And Chris, what I want to do is schedule a part 2 to this, because I have so much more questions myself. And I know in the chat there was some, but my daughter has this Google Meet with her class that she needs to log in, and we're going to lose the bandwidth in a few minutes here. So let's start to wind down. And before we do that, tell people how to reach you, and I'll put the scrolling banner back up here with your website here. Tell them about the book, where we can get the book. I think you have it in audio format as well. So let people know how to reach you here, and to get that dialogue going with you, because I think you're one of those players that people need to listen to and participate in this empowerment fractal, I guess, because we're all in this little fractal of how we're changing the world right now. And you're into your sliver, and you're so authentic, and it's going to be effective. So I want people to start communicating with you and to build that relationship with you.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you again for having me on here. It's been really nice talking with you. People want to find me, I'm at arcadiaeconomics.com. I also have a YouTube channel, which is Arcadia Economics. And actually, I'd love to bring you on there sometime and talk more about that economics background, which, I mean, and that's the thing, like the genuine, I did my last year going to the trading floor, I'd walk through Occupy Wall Street, and I always remember this day where I saw there was one guy holding a sign saying a job is a right, and he was sitting there just bullshitting with the guy wearing a Ron Paul t-shirt. And that's when it hit me that it's like people are understandably angry, yet don't know what was going on. So when I left Wall Street, I didn't know how it was going to work out, but I felt it was something that for all the people that got clobbered by the mortgage bubble, and for whatever reason, I've wondered before, why was it me who saw this and not the other guy? And, you know, maybe that's just the way our life goes, but I felt it was important at least. And that's why we've kept the show free, you know, and, you know, as try to figure out different ways to make it into a business. I always thought it was important that people get at least my unbiased best opinion. I don't claim to have everything right, but certainly I really appreciate what you said, because I realize if I don't have integrity, then people can, now I know scientifically, people, whether they realize it or not, sniff that out a mile away. Although maybe the way I would put it is that, you know, which would be more fun, to be George Bush for a day, or just to have your best friends in the world show up in your backyard? Maybe they bring a 6-pack of beers and you just, so I would never want to live like that. I'm blessed that the way I was raised and brought up, you know, it's not, and it's just a lot more fun to, you know, not making a fortune right now, but the fact that I get messages every day, people really appreciate what the show and the information we're bringing, that means a lot. So if people have any questions, you can also reach me through the site at arcadiaeconomics.com, and want to check out the book there, you can get that too.
And to be specific, is the book on pre-order still? Where do we get the book, and the audio book? Where do we get that?
Audio book you can get today. The print book, I'm glad to announce, I'm I'm terrible at guessing how long a book takes to actually finish, but it's finally out of my hands and going to the printer this week. So hopefully the print version will be out another week or two. We really wanted to get that out there before this thing unfolds.
And where is that going to be sold? Directly from your website? Or are you on Amazon?
Website, big tab in the middle says the Big Silver Short. So you can get that there, and Bix is in it, and a whole bunch of other interesting characters. So you can hear it not just from my words, but 15 experts, and you hear how they all match the same thing. So it's been a lot of fun, and I'm just grateful to be able to do this and to feel it making an impact now is a special feeling.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for your time today. Really, really appreciate this interview. And like I said, I'll send you an email as soon as we finish the show to reschedule, do a part 2, because I think we have way more to discuss here, and we had some more questions we couldn't get to. So I want to get to that. So I'll email, and we'll schedule that very soon. So thank you very much, Chris. And for everyone on YouTube, thank you for watching. If you like what we're doing, please hit the like button, please subscribe, and share it. Share the video with other people who are just waking up and who are looking for this information, who are starving for this information. That's what it's all about. We're here to help each other grow, to develop self-mastery, and that's the best we could do at this time. And let's just be happy and be informed. And as Chris said, hopefully these lockdowns are lifted soon enough so that we can have our friends over for a few beer and just be humans again. I mean, that's the whole point, right? That's why we're here. So again, thank you everyone for watching the show, and we'll see you soon. Au revoir.
So there is tonight's episode. Thank you as always for watching. If you like this one, go ahead, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell right down there, or maybe it's that side. I never remember. But if you found it helpful, also hit the share button. Let other people get access to this. Thank you again for everyone who's been spreading the word. Our tribe is growing quite rapidly, which is really nice. So thank you for being part of it. I do appreciate that. And in case you missed Dave Kranzler's interview that was broadcast this morning, I think you'll want to check that out. And here it is.